Hey, what's up guys? JB here, and welcome to another episode of Future Look. And today we have a new unit for probably my favorite element in the game, the Ice element. And we have 100 cost Alaya Rundall. Now we've been seeing Alaya in the story for some time now, and I think a lot of people actually have been anticipating her quite a bit. I have seen some people forecasting out there that she may be a dark unit, just because of her aesthetic and maybe to be just a counterweight to Jaden. But at this point, I think Dark has gotten enough new toys this year, and it is time for another element to shine. And they've actually been sprinkling in the Ice element here and there throughout the year. We've actually just gotten Eliza here in Global, which will be a very nice partner in crime for Alaya. Over on the JP side, they did actually get Snow and Agrius at the 2.5-year anniversary, kind of giving Ice a very good frontline presence. And now Ice is going to get another high damage range threat here in Alaya. So let's dive into the preview here today and let's see what she can do. Now, as we said, Alaya is going to be a 100 cost Ice unit. She has a base 3-1 movement and she can wear hats and cloth. And we're expecting her to join the permanent summoning pool here in Global in about 3.5 months. Now starting off, I want to say I've completely redesigned my character sheet here, and I really hope that this will be a better layout and provide even more detailed information than ever before. So I'd love to hear any feedback that people have on this, or maybe if you have any ideas to make it even better, definitely let me know. That said, as we do, let's start with her TMR. And this one I really do like. For starters, it's an accessory that has a combination of both attack and agility base stats on it, which to my knowledge, we haven't actually seen that combination on a TMR before. So that alone is going to make this pretty notable. Aside from those base stats, the effect that it's bringing I can see really nice uses for both auto and manual PvP. In auto, for example, Sottily will not be able to charm you while this effect is active. It also has this really nice buffing radius on it, so that even if you're starting more than 3 squares apart in the initial phase of the battle, you'll still be able to reach and buff your teammates. Now specifically in terms of that effect, the Berserk, Stop, and Charm statuses are 3 of the most backbreaking statuses in the game due to complete loss of control of your character. So having 2 casts to completely shut those off does make it one of the better manual TMRs that I've seen in quite a while. Now moving down into Alaya's stats, and this is the main part of the redesign that I was talking about. And you can see here I have both the base and innate stat values for Alaya. So innate is meaning her base value plus any nodes on her board that you can unlock. And next to that section I have a chart which is comparing those stats against the current UR averages for each and every one of those statistics, with the base stat value being represented here in yellow and the innate stats represented in green. The black line that's running through the middle is representing the current UR average for those stats. So this gives just a simple and clean look at how this unit is going to stack up against their UR competition. And I think with that you can kind of begin to see some of the core strengths and weaknesses of the unit. So in that regard, we can see Alaya is right at or close to the UR average for HP, attack, and base agility, while at the same time she is actually above average when it comes to luck and her innate agility. She is also well above average when it comes to her dexterity and accuracy numbers. Now please note I have included any relevant passives that the unit may have access to when factoring the unit's innate, evade, and accuracy numbers. And that's why I actually have that asterisk there next to those stats. So yeah, in the past I've generally sort of just commented on these various numbers, but I do hope this graphical representation will give you better insight into where this unit actually stands amongst their UR competition. For Alaya, as we said, that dex value is really standing out, and her base value at 270 is actually the highest in the entire game. Now she doesn't get quite as much dex coming in on her board nodes as some other gunner units, so when we look at her innate value it does come down just a little bit. Still though, it's a very top end total at 308 innate dexterity. And that in turn is definitely going to bump up her crit value and certainly her accuracy as well. That along with her above average luck total that we can see here, and including passives, it actually has her at a 197% innate accuracy, and that's actually tied for 10th overall in the game as of today. Now on the defensive front for Alaya, she actually is getting an innate 4 defense and 0 spirit here. She has positive resistances for pierce and missile damage at 15% each. She is positive in slash resistance as well, but it's just at a modest 5%. On the more negative side, she is -5 to magic attacks. So that actually coupled with her 0 spirit and average level of hit points will definitely have her in one-shot range for high-powered magical threats out there. In terms of her ailment resists, she does get blind resist at 50%, and that's definitely going to be helpful in the bold Leela matchups out there. She does also get confuse and stun resists on top of that, and that actually could be nice if you're actually countering your own element in the ice element with Alaya. Agarius and Snow are actually two notable units that use those status effects currently on the JP side. There is a pretty notable mastery here for Alaya as well that I want to mention, and she gets a 30% innate chance to block counters, as well as an enhanced 15% chance to frostbite her enemies. And that's something that we'll actually go into and talk a little bit more in the skills overview. Alright, so moving into Alaya's support abilities and counters. And build option 1 that I have here is going to be sort of a max range, max accuracy build, and that's including her main job passive, which is passive 1 here. This is giving her 2 range and 40 defense penetration. And I think this is one you're pretty much always going to want to have equipped just because that's her main source of defense pen. And for this particular build path, I would use option 2 here, which is Ranger Lore. And that's going to give her a total of 3 additional range along with that enhanced 25% accuracy. And that's going to get her to that 197 innate value that we were just talking about. Now the next build option is going to leverage a pretty unique passive, since this actually gives her a -1 to her movement. And I can definitely see very nice uses for this within the autoplay environments. The one thing that I sort of don't like about this is that all of the latest 100 cost units have had just a stacked main job passive, and that's had actually 3 different effects on them. In Alaya's case, they've actually opted to give her 2 different passives and have sort of split up the effects between those 2. I think I really would have liked to have seen this acquired AP in particular moved into that first passive. And that's because this move down option, while it certainly has nice uses, to sort of keep her in the back line for autoplay, and that's something that players have done in the past with an item like the Producer's Bowtie, which also lowers your movement. I do think though that, even in autoplay, using this move down passive, may be something that is map dependent and may not always be something that you actually want to use. And this passive certainly would never be used from a manual play context. So overall, I'm not totally in love with this setup. I just wish Alaya was able to get that acquired AP up into the first passive, and I think that would just give her more flexibility overall in other modes or styles of play, even including PvE. Alright, now the third build I have here, and definitely probably more of a niche option, but with this one you can kind of make her a little bit tankier. This option 4 here is actually Holy Knight's Protection from Paladin, and this would actually get her up to a 16 base defense before gearing, which isn't too shabby. Like I said though, definitely more niche. I don't really envision myself using this one all that often. In terms of Alaya's counter abilities, like many other range units out there, she does have access to Reflex, which is very nice. In fact, she actually gets 2 different versions of Reflex. The first one here is a physical only reflex, so it's only going to work on physical scaled attacks. And this one is kind of interesting because it does give her a 30% attack buff when it procs off. So you can certainly use this one if you're going to be only targeting physical based damage dealers. Otherwise, just go with the tried and true original reflex, which will work on physical or magical attacks. Alright, so let's start digging into Alaya's brand new main job, and we're going to start here with her buffs. And her self-only buff gives her a 25 missile attack while also restoring 30 CT. I think this is actually really nice for manual play. If you combo this along with waiting in place, you're already going to be halfway to your next turn. You could then even combo this with some other CT mechanics, such as Keen Blade, and that's going to very easily get you another turn just with those alone. And the CT manipulation skills, are always very interesting with the different combos that you're able to pull off with them. With some setup and tuning, I think this can be really powerful in autoplay also. That same Keen Blade combo is something you can very easily pull off, in that arena as well. And the ice roster does have a lot of notable units who are able to use that. Her next buff here provides a 30 ice attack to your allies. On top of that, it's giving 3 different buffs to Alaya herself. And that's going to be 40 missile res penetration, a 33% reduced AP consumption, and a +1 range. This is just a monster buff. Those latter effects, they don't actually have any turn count associated with them either. And they actually last until Alaya gets hit 2 times. Now, as always, when the skill denotes hits, that means a chain attack will dispel that in one go. Now, I really like this buff. Within an ice element party, it definitely gives her a little bit of added utility and can buff up her teammates. And having this online and not having to refresh that additional range up is a very nice quality of life for her. I think it actually combos really well with that acquired AP passive that we were just talking about. Now, in terms of buff priority, from everything that I've seen on the Japanese side, she will actually lead off with this buff, even if other teammates are not in range. And then she'll start using that first buff that we talked about with the missile attack and CT up. All right, moving on now to Alaya's main job attacks. And the first one up here is her low AP skill. This one has a base range of 5 with a range height of 2. So if you have her 2 range passive along with the self buff, you're going to be looking at an 8 total range on these attacks. And you can even get that up to a 9 range if you were to also take Ranger lore. This one has the basic low 121% damage mod. But before the damage, it's actually dispelling re-raise on top of that. So that is super nice to be able to have this kind of utility from such a long range. Now her second skill here does give her access to a single target barrier break, and that comes with a medium 165 mod after the barrier is broken. And I think that we've just sort of come to expect this sort of utility from modern damage dealers. But this is very nice when you think about some of the recently released units on the Japanese side that Alaya may be up against. Units like Final Fantasy XIII's Lightning or Revolution Glaciella, both of whom are relying heavily on 50% barriers for their survivability. This one is also a 3-hit chain attack on top of that, so it's going to make it very, very nice for guild raids as well. Okay, so attack number 3 here is a range 4 with a +1 on the cross AoE. It's got a range height of 2, again with a +1 on the area of effect. 165% mod, and prior to the damage coming in, this one does break defense by 30. That's always very strong, especially on low defense foes. It does bring a second effect on it as well, and that's a 25% chance to frostbite. And we will add that 15% increased chance that we talked about from her mastery ability on top of that. So that's going to give her a very nice 40% base chance to frostbite her enemies. And that alone is a reason that I would definitely run Alaya at 97 faith. Even despite her base weakness to magic and lack of spirit, I'm not so worried about those aspects, just because she is a backline unit and she really should be out of the line of fire in a lot of situations. And I think you really want to capitalize on that enhanced chance to land her status effect. So if she's at 97 faith and her target is also at 97, we're looking at a roughly 78% chance to land frostbite. And even if your target is at 50 faith, you're still going to have a 59% chance in that scenario. So that is very, very strong. Now, obviously, prior to today's update, Frostbite hasn't always been the most immediately impactful status. And that's because the AP was always drained after you took your turn. With the change in today's update, though, Frostbite is actually quite a bit better. And that's because the AP is drained at the beginning of your turn. So for units that don't have large AP pools innately, it can be completely crippling for them, and it will definitely put them in sort of a continuous buffing or continuous auto attack state. I think this potentially can be even more powerful and crippling if you were to combo her with a unit like Eliza. She does actually bring a flat AP break in her kit. So I do really love this skill for those reasons, and it's definitely one of her signature moves. Alright, her last ability here, this is a range 5 with a range height of 2, 165 mod, just like the others. So interestingly here, no 200% large damage mods for Alaya. Now this skill does actually give her more pseudo area of effect, since this is actually a piercing skill. So that means it's going to pierce and go through the first target and hit anyone behind them in a line. This one again is actually bringing 2 effects. Pre-damage, it's dispelling protect, which is very, very nice. Definitely makes it more difficult to mitigate her damage. And then after hitting, it also has a 38% missile imperil. And since this is a main skill in her kit, that means that she's able to use this multiple times. And that in turn, just makes this unit that much more powerful in multi-round PvP. Now this isn't a skill that's going to delete anyone off the battlefield in one hit. And that's because this imperil is coming after the damage is applied. Still though, very nice skill nonetheless, and it will certainly ramp up their damage as the fight goes on. And the missile imperil in general is still very, very rare in the game. Alright, in terms of the limit burst here, and again this has a range 5 with a range height of 2. Interesting that there is no dead zone on this particular skill. So she can even target the direct vicinity around her, which is not usually the case for gunner skills. Now post damage, this actually brings 2 effects. The first one is a high chance to immobilize the target, and the second one is conditional on that immobilized landing, and this one is a 38% ice imperil. So that does give her access to 2 very nice imperils in her kit. Unfortunately, both of those imperils are coming post damage. Still very nice to have and still very strong even so. Now, Immobilize can be very strong in PvP, especially on a ranged unit like Alaya. If you're able to lock somebody in place and you outrange them, they essentially can't do anything to retaliate against you in that case. And Immobilize isn't something that enemies typically guard against. Now, my main issue with this skill is that conditional debuff of the ice resistance. And this is an issue I also have with Sweetheart Ildira as well and her single target resist break. And when you make the debuff conditional on landing a status ailment, it effectively just kills the usage of that in high-end PvE like guild raids. And that's because all those bosses are just immune to status effects. So I do kind of dislike that direction, sort of these conditional debuffs. If they were worried about maybe the Imperil being too strong, maybe they could just reduce it to 25% or something rather than making it conditional. And that way you could at least use it in PvE as well if you wanted to. All right, so let's quickly go over Alaya's subjobs here next. She does get 2 additional attacks in her main job sub, and they're actually both pretty decent. And the first one here gives her a skill with an agility break on it. And that just sort of is adding to her already good debuffing capabilities. She does also get a charm arrow here as well. I do think this is maybe more of a niche sub-job, maybe something you might consider for manual play or for PvE, but definitely nice, for those occasions. Now she does get the Ranger sub-job here as well. She gets the key skills there in Sharpshoot and Barrage, so that's going to get her a guaranteed hit to fall back on if she needs it, as well as that very large diamond AoE that Barrage brings. Now, Ranger and her other sub-job Paladin are definitely kind of showing their age in the current state of the game. And that's just because the skills are generally lacking in additional utility or effects that other modern jobs bring. And that's because both of these jobs are from when the game first launched. Now, they have just announced on the Japanese side that they are working on a balance revision for all of these older jobs. And Ranger in particular is going to be one of the first ones that's upgraded. They did mention in particular that they are working on one of the charge skills for Ranger that would actually give it a unit resist down. So that would actually be quite amazing and make Alaya one of the best debuffers in the entire game. So really interesting development there, and we'll definitely be keeping an eye on that. Our next job here in Paladin I think is going to be another sort of niche use, maybe more of a manual type selection. At least for right now, we'll have to wait and see what sort of upgrades the Paladin subjob gets, when it gets looked at. It does give her access to some nice mitigation tools though in Sentinel and Saintly Wall. I think though that most players will be focused on keeping Alaya on the back line and sort of out of enemy attack range. So I do think that would have players leaning more heavily maybe on that Ranger subjob. Alright, so on to our future considerations section, and this is where we look at complementary things that are going to be released in or around Alaya's addition to the game. And we're going to start first here with her vision card. And this one is okay, I'm not super crazy about this one. And I think that starts with the party effects. Maybe if this one had a full 35% missile res penetration, I might be a little more excited about it. But when you look at it, it's definitely more of a defensive-oriented card. The base stats on it, though, are pretty decent. It's kind of giving a little bit of everything that Alaya would like. Has some agility, some dex, some AP on there. So I do like that. I do like the bestowed ability as well, also leading into that agility, giving her that 8% agility. So I think they're definitely compensating here, for that middling base agility that we talked about in the stats overview. So that's definitely going to help her out quite a bit and definitely make her very competitive in terms of agility. But yeah, this is definitely more of a defensive focused card, which is interesting. The 2 full value party effects here being for 20% pierce resistance and 20 crit evasion. And those 2 mitigations, while pretty nice, I'm not sure they're going to be the first ones that I look towards when I'm building out my defensive setup. So I'm not totally in love with it from that angle. But those effects definitely will be very nice and maybe a win more button against Revolution Glaciella, if you're trying to hard counter her. And certainly if I was setting up an attack team to specifically hunt her, I would probably look towards this card. You may look at this card as well if you were expecting to face opponents that had very, very high missile resist as well. That's another nice use for it. But outside of those situations, for more general purpose building, I definitely see this as a card I would potentially push towards maybe a secondary slot, or potentially not even use at all, depending on the damage dealers that were predominant in the meta at that time and what sort of damage that they bring. So I think this is definitely strong for its specific niche, but definitely not my favorite card, despite being the first one that we've seen actually with missile res penetration on it. And outside of a very nice exclusive bestowed ability being added onto this when it gets released in global, I'm kind of actually liking Eliza's card a little bit better for general use, at least with how I'm seeing things right now. Alright, moving on, and we are getting a new weapon released alongside Alaya, and this one I have translated as the Peacemaker. Sounds about right, I guess. Really interesting one here though, as this one does have a blend of both attack and magic base stats on it. It's also bringing 20 defense and spirit penetration. So I think this makes it a very flexible weapon. It's even something that could be used on Jaden, and we really don't have very many weapon options for him, so I think that would be really, really nice. I have highlighted the AIM version here, which brings a very nice 26 base accuracy on it. And again, we're just seeing a lot more passives tied into all of the recently released equipment on the Japanese side. So on top of those penetrations that we just talked about, it's also getting 15 missile attack and a 30% chance to block counters. So if Alaya has this weapon equipped, she's just going to have a 60% chance to ignore counters completely, which is very, very nice. So good all-around item here. There's also no negative agility stat tied into this one, which is actually a first for a +5 MR of this particular weapon type. So it does have that going for it as well. All right, so flashing over into our 2022 timeline here, and we are actually getting Alaya's partner in crime here, Eliza, in Global this week. I do actually have a full preview on Eliza that I did a few months back when she came out in JP, so I'll put a link to that above if you haven't seen it. And if you know that you're already going for Alaya, I definitely would recommend at a minimum picking up Eliza's card, which should come out next week. As we were kind of just talking about in the previous section, it does bring a little bit more offensive capability with the 35 missile attack on it. So I think it would be a really nice option to have in Alaya's tool belt as well. In terms of other things going on for Ice, we can look no further than the 2.5-year anniversary, and we actually have Snow and Agarius both coming in, and either of them I think should actually be able to serve as a pretty nice front line or tank for the Ice elements. On that front though, I do believe Snow is a better overall tank, at least as how things stand right now. We will have to sort of see, what they do with the job revisions for both Paladin and Cleric for Agarius. It could certainly be subject to change, depending on what happens there. We'll just have to sort of wait and see. On the counter element side, in terms of fire, the only fire element threat that's being added is again at that 2.5-year anniversary with Delita. I will throw in there as well, we are anticipating maybe some mastery upgrades for the summer units, and Summer Katone is in there. So that's another potential thing to look at. We do have other pending events here in the schedule, which I believe will certainly change that situation. With all of this ice that they've added in, it just seems like a slam dunk at this point that we're going to be getting sold on a Fire global exclusive, which I'm pretty excited about, to be honest. Fire definitely needs some love, especially with a vision card. So a global exclusive vision card, I think, could go a long way to improving Fire's standing. So yeah, that's what the next 4 months are looking like, guys. So if you're interested in any of these pieces, do plan accordingly. And that leads us to our last section here, which is a mock build that I've put together for Alaya. And we'll start first with the equipment. I have the Peacemaker that we just talked about. I also have the +6 diamond coat that was recently released on the Japanese side. And that actually gets a pretty nice upgrade. It adds an additional passive for 20% dex. And of course, that's on top of the already nice passives it has with the missile res penetration and acquired AP. And I do think this combination of equipment is very, very nice for really any gunner out there, since you're actually going to have 6 very nice passives, just between these 2 items. I do have Bell's Honor here as well, and I think this is maybe more of just a stat stick in this case for that accuracy and agility. But even with the reduced AP consumption that Alaya can have, Barrage is still a very expensive skill. So having that AP restore available to you in the back pocket, could be a nice option to have. But yeah, TMR is always a free choice, depending on what type of effect you may need for the battle. I think her own TMR that we talked about could be a very nice option as well. For her Esper, I went tried and true with Odin here, just for that combination of human killer and accuracy that it's bringing. Maybe an under-the-radar Esper pick for hard countering Glaciella would actually be Shiva. Most people think of Shiva as a magical Esper, but she does actually bring a lot of nice other things to the table. Obviously you would get that 10% wind resistance as well as the massive 20 agility, but you can take the 25 ice attack, the 20 pierce resistance, and then you can even throw in another 15 wind eater in that build as well. And I think that actually would be a very nice setup for a wind attacker when you're hard countering wind. But certainly if you weren't using Shiva on Alaya, you could put them on your tank or frontline unit as well. And in terms of going up against Glaciella, I'm hard pressed to find a better option. Now looking at the vision cards here, I have my trifecta setup going on: single target resistance and HP from Dark Odin, area resistance from Manipul, and then the Laswell agility card here as well. Dark Odin is actually pulling double duty with that 50% attack on top. I have missile res penetration from the Alaya VC, the defense penetration from Snow's VC, And then I have missile attack up from the Eliza card, and those are all in the sub slots. There is mixed in here as well some pierce and slash resist on top, so I think this is a really nice balanced setup. If you wanted to more heavily lean into an anti-glassy setup, we do have the Fryevia vision card here as well in global, and you could put that on Snow or on your tank. That's going to give them some innate hate as well as the party wind resistance. Another nice secondary option could be the Freezes vision card, not only for the ice attack that it brings, but also for the HP that it would bring to the party. All right, moving into the Trust Stone setup that I have here. And as always, my first stone here is dedicated towards countering something in the meta. And here I have that combination of wind and pierce resistance to fight off Glaciella. If you were looking for something maybe more general purpose that would apply to many different types of teams, I do always like the all attack type and all element type debuff resistance passives. And the reason that I like those is that if Alaya were to get unloaded on with sort of a high octane limit burst that would have an Imperil coming pre-damage, this one is just going to give you that flat 25% chance to block that and potentially save yourself from being one-shot. So choose what's going to best fit your situation. In this case, I'm building off some of the base attributes that Alaya has, in terms of her nice pierce resistance, so I thought this was a good way to go. Now, adding on to that, with stones 2 and 3 here, I have my standard defensive setup with the magic res, slash res, the HP, and luck. And in general, I do think that magic and slash resistance is very good coverage for Alaya. She is weaker when it comes to those damage types. And I do have all of these passives tied into a luck set, and that's just to enhance her accuracy a bit, but also luck does contribute just a little bit to her damage as well. Now on the right side, I have built an attack set here, and that's to get her some more defense penetration. And this set, along with Snow's vision card, is going to get her up to more than 80% innate defense pen. Now the Trust Stone passives that I have here, are a bit more interesting. Just because we simply have so much covered already between the Peacemaker and the Diamond Coat. So here I'm using attack percentage, ice attack, crit rate and crit damage, and 10 accuracy, which I do think actually goes pretty well with the aim type Peacemaker that we were talking about earlier. And I just want to say, accuracy, even outside of a big evade meta is something that we should always be cognizant of and thinking about. You don't really want to be caught in a situation where you miss key skills like your limit burst or other powerful skills. Now in the future, if we did see more evade creeping back into the meta, you could very easily swap this attack set over to an accuracy set as well and sort of improve her accuracy even more. Now the last passive that I tied onto her here is a healing power passive, and that's sort of just a free choice at that point. Because so much was already covered, there really wasn't a lot of value that I could find here, so I just sort of threw that healing power on there. I will say though, in terms of equipping passives on the Trust Stone set here, sort of running out of optimal choices, this was really the first time that I can think of that's happened to me, in terms of building out recent units. But I do think this is sort of the interesting situation that we're moving towards with the recent power creep on equipment. As I've talked about, all of the recent equipment on the Japanese side is getting 3 to 4 different passives. The +6 equipment is gradually getting upgraded. They're getting more passives as well. And I do think this is intentional to sort of lessen the gap between hardcore and casual players that sort of developed since the onset of the Trust Stone system. I think that gap is definitely still there, to be clear, but as we get more of this second generation gear and more +6 equipment gets upgraded, I think that gap will be lessened quite a bit. And I think that gap is especially lessened, if you're a player who maybe has done enough to forge matching pink sets, but maybe hasn't gone into the step of optimizing all of the specific passives and sort of min-maxing there. And I do really like this equipment development for that reason. Despite how fun and interesting Trust Stones can be to set up and configure, I do 100% recognize that the implementation is clunky and way too grindy, and has been overall very detrimental to the health and state of the game. And really, I think they need to keep going on this trend, lessen the grind, make it easier for casual players so that they just don't get left behind. Alright, so off of the soapbox and onto the stats here. Alaya, she's looking very solid here all around. We don't even have a dexterity VC in the party, and you can see she's got a very solid dex stat. And dex, is very important for any gunner unit out there. Besides the normal crit and accuracy stats that it's going to enhance, it does actually factor into her damage formula a decent amount as well. Her attack value here at 1409, it's decent enough, pretty good for a ranged unit. The agility, you can see, despite her shortcomings when it comes to her base stat, she is at a pretty competitive level here as well. Now remember, she doesn't have access to any agility buff in her kit like some other range units do, but she does have that CT skill that we talked about earlier, and that's certainly going to speed her up quite a bit. So what is my verdict on this unit? In terms of the pros, one, she has an insane debuffing capability. She has that Missile Imperil, and that one in particular is still very rare in the game. And even though it's conditional, she does also have access to that Ice Imperil on her Limit Burst on top of that. She has a defense break. She has an attack and agility down ability. She also has the capability to dispel, protect, and barriers. So just a lot of nice options in terms of debuffing here for Alaya. Don't forget too, she has those ailments in Frostbite and Charm there as well. My second pro is she has a very nice TMR, and in particular for class match and manual play, it's definitely one of the better ones that we've seen just to protect against those statuses. 3, she's a really accurate unit, within the top 10 as we talked about if you use her Ranger lore. On top of that, she is a very nice chainer as well. So I think that assortment of debuffs that she has, along with this chaining capability, will put her in a very good spot in terms of guild raids and PvE. Now, to be honest, that is something we are actually seeing on a lot of recently released units, so this actually could just sort of be a new norm. We'll just have to continue to monitor it. Now, my fourth and last pro here is sort of related to this modern gunner job, and one thing I was very concerned about when I first saw that Alaya was a gunner, I wondered if she would be susceptible to the traditional gunner shortcomings, in terms of obstacles and line of sight and pathing issues in her way. But in terms of everything that I've seen from the Japanese side and in terms of watching various PvP videos, it seems that even if a teammate is directly in front of her, she is able to still hit and target the enemy. So that leads me to believe that she doesn't really have to worry about this issue. She actually seems to have some sort of magical bullets at her disposal. It's something that I'll definitely need to test out more, once she gets released on global. But at least at first glance, it doesn't seem to be a problem for her. And that's definitely a sigh of relief for Alaya. It always was very puzzling to me that gunners had this sort of limitation when other units with swords and daggers could sort of throw them through teammates or through walls or obstacles and still be able to hit the enemy. Yet a gunner couldn't do that, and that just always felt very arbitrary and lame to me. So if this is true, I'm glad that they're moving away from that design philosophy, and that is something that I would urge them to fix when they're updating the gunner job, but I'm not going to hold my breath on that one. Moving on to my concerns for Alaya, and my first one is definitely that her tankiness is very, very suspect. I think that's something that we've come to expect though from range units. No native area or single target resistance for her, and she's definitely lacking when it comes to slash and magic damage. So this is definitely a unit that will go down very easily if you're able to get to her, especially with those particular damage types. So it's going to be very important to keep her on the back line and out of enemy fire. My second concern is that she's not going to be the kind of unit that sort of deletes other units in one shot. And that's because she doesn't have access to any large damage mods outside of her Limit Burst. And her attack stat, while it is pretty good for a range unit, it is below the 500 mark. The damage that she does bring, though, I think is pretty hard to mitigate just because of the innate penetrations that she has access to. And I think it will be competitive with other high-end range damage threats. So those are really the main issues, that are coming to mind. And, even at that, I'm not super worried about these two. And that's simply because she is a range unit. She should generally be out of the enemy line of fire, sort of in the back line. And Alaya here just brings such good debuffing capability and range that I think it just more than makes up for any small shortcomings that we're looking at here. Alright, so that's Alaya, guys. Definitely has a lot of good debuffs and dispels at her disposal. And I think that's just going to make her a great manual unit, really good in auto play too, and she'll even be excellent in PvE and guild raids on top of that. So very, very solid unit all around, something that I think we've just sort of come to expect, from the latest 100 cost units. It is very nice to see Ice getting some love recently, and I think by the time that Alaya comes to global, we're just going to have a lot of new potential options and combinations to play with. And I think we're really going to be seeing a lot of Ice out there on the battlefield, and it's really been a while, I think, since we could say that. I know that I can't wait to throw Alaya here into a group with units like Curry or Eliza, Rosa, or even Barrett. The ice missile options are becoming quite nice, with a lot of different directions and builds that you could do. And I think it's really becoming a core strength of the element. I'm hard pressed to think of another element that has this many ranged options. And options are always good, in team building, so I think that's really going to be a lot of fun. Beyond what we've talked about here today, as we touched upon a little bit, there are job updates that are going to be coming in after I release this video. They've already teased some of those updates there that they're planning for the Ranger job, and that's really just going to enhance Alaya's capabilities even further. So I'm really excited for that as well. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what they do. So how are you guys feeling about Alaya? As I said in the beginning, I think a lot of people actually have been anticipating her, including myself. So what did you think after hearing about her kit today? Definitely hit me up in the comments down below and let me know. If you enjoyed the video today and you like what I'm doing here on the channel, please give the video a like, it really helps me out a lot. And hit that subscribe button if you want to see more. And that's really all that I have to say for today. So as always, stay safe out there, and I'll see you guys in the next one.